First things first, fuck you, Nintendo. How dare you? How dare you make something that I should be ecstatic over, and yet somehow make me furious at the thought of it actually happening. I haven't had a dream come true turn into a nightmare this quickly since the Red Ash Kickstarter, and yet I can't resist. Nintendo is like a crack dealer that way. So, let's theorycraft about the Super Nintendo Classic Edition. Before we get into the games that should be on the system, we need to cover the games that can't be. No licensed games like Turtles in Time, UN Squadron, or Ken Griffey Jr. No Japanese games that were never officially translated like Fire Emblem. No rare games that Nintendo hasn't retained the rights to like Killer Instinct. No peripheral-based games like Mario Paint or Yoshi Safari. Also, franchises like Final Fight and Mega Man are restricted to one apiece. One of the great things about the NES Classic selection of games is that every title on it stands out from the rest, and it gets the most out of a selection of 30 games. I want to do the same for my Super Nintendo concept and make sure that no two games are alike. And, hear me out here, no Star Fox and no Yoshi's Island. Look, these are great games and Yoshi's Island was my childhood, but we can't have them. The Super FX chip that these games ran on is owned by Argonaut Games, and they'll never agree to license it to Nintendo to re-release these games. You see, Argonaut and Nintendo have a little something we like to call a blood feud. No time to discuss it here, check out a video I'll have linked in the description for details. So yeah, licensing these old games can be a lot more complicated than you'd think, and games that might be obvious could actually be unobtainable. As such, I'll be basing a lot of my choices on what the Virtual Console has in order to be sure that we can get a hold of everything. Speaking of which, one last exception is SimCity. It was on Virtual Console for a time, but it was pulled for unknown reasons. Maybe if I was on the inside, I'd know enough to say on whether or not a relaunch was possible. For now, I'm just going to play it safe and plan around not getting it. Okay, actual games now. Naturally, we start with the holy trinity of Nintendo: Mario, Zelda, and Metroid. Super Mario World, The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, and Super Metroid. Undoubtedly three of the best games for the system and must-have headliners for the Super Nintendo Classic. Up next is the cult classic F-Zero. Beloved racing game closely associated with the Super Nintendo? Gotta have it. Then is Pilot Wings, a flight sim and one of the first hit games for the system. Now let's cover a few of the big third-party games. Can't have Super Nintendo without JRPGs, and easily one of the best is Chrono Trigger. Another game you can't go without is Street Fighter, but which Street Fighter? Street Fighter 2 had a bunch of re-releases on the SNES, and there was also a version of Street Fighter Alpha for the system. So which do we go with? Well, Alpha 2 had its share of technical issues, and casual fans noticed roster quantity first, so let's go with the largest roster of the bunch with Super Street Fighter 2, The New Challengers. Next is Harvest Moon, a change of pace with a solid farming sim. And then we have two third-party platformers that need to be on there: Mega Man X and Super Castlevania 4. Now let's focus on broadening the genres we have, starting with shooters. For shoot 'em up, we have Gradius 3, and for run and gun, we have Contra 3: The Alien Wars. For beat 'em up, we have Final Fight 3. Now, I know you're wondering about the first one, but the first one is the worst one, especially on Super Nintendo. 3 has aged much better. We don't have a lot of sports games to choose from due to licensing issues, so the closest we can get is Super Punch-Out. It's debatable on whether it's more of a sports game, a fighting game, or even a puzzle game, but it'll certainly push more copies than, say, Super Baseball 2020. Secret of Mana is a solid action RPG with co-op that's certainly worth getting. We can't have Tetris Attack as our puzzle game because Nintendo doesn't own the Tetris brand, so instead we'll have Kirby's Avalanche. Basically, Puyo Puyo with Kirby characters. As for a real Kirby game, Kirby Superstar. Obviously. Tons of content, one of the best in the franchise, and a great choice for an easy game. For the polar opposite of an easy game, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. Have fun, masochists! Now that we have a healthy variety of games, let's get some more big names in there. Example? Earthbound! That'll sell some copies. Another must-have is Donkey Kong Country, and any fan can tell you that the best is number 2. Next big name? I didn't want to do this, but it's gotta have Super Mario Kart. It hasn't aged well, but people are still gonna clamor for it, so we gotta have it. Just don't go accuse me of playing favorites. We want to be careful about going too heavy on the JRPGs, but I think we can squeeze in 2 more. Final Fantasy VI, because it's one of the most acclaimed titles in Final Fantasy history, and you kinda have to have a Final Fantasy game on here. Also, Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. A good gateway game for those new to JRPGs, and it has Mario characters. How can you go wrong? That brings us to the final stretch with a handful of oddball picks that'll really make the collection stand out. And what better way to start than with the oddest of oddball games on the Super Nintendo, Legend of the Mystical Ninja. It's like an arcade platformer, beat-em-up, adventure, RPG-esque thing. It's really weird and also awesome. Then we have ActRaiser, an RTS action platformer hybrid that actually works way better than it has any right to. Wild Guns, a unique take on a sort of 16-bit third-person shooter. Next up is Super Adventure Island, a fairly straightforward platformer with the novel twist of having a hunger meter acting as your time limit. Okay, this next one is going to sound crazy, but hear me out. Pack Attack. I know there's plenty of other games you'd rather see on here, but we don't want too many platformers or RPGs lumped together. The more games you have of the same genre, the less special each of the games become, and the less appealing the system becomes. Conversely, we only have one other puzzle game, and it plays very differently from Pack Attack. This game also adds the Pac-Man brand to our lineup, in a admittedly tangential way, but that brand recognition alone will help attract a lot of people. For the last two, I'm going to take a risk and suggest that Nintendo look outside the Japanese market and include a couple of Western-developed games. First is Zombies Ate My Neighbors, an isometric shooter with a B-movie horror aesthetic and cooperative play. And finally, the biggest stretch I've made for this entire lineup, but to hell with it, I've earned this, Super Star Wars. Yes, it's based on a license, but this is the one exception we can make, as the studio that developed it is a Lucasfilm's own internal game dev, LucasArts. There's actually not that much legal red tape to go through on this one compared to any other licensed game. Both of these are already up on Virtual Console, at least for the Wii, so it should be possible to get them for the Super Nintendo Classic Edition. If, for whatever reason, we can't get these or any other third-party games I've listed, I have also prepared a few backup options just in case. Please note the backups are only games that Nintendo holds ownership of because A, we don't want to have to find backups for our backups, and B, we absolutely shouldn't insult any of our third-party business partners by getting deals for these games and then just turn around and say, hey, we don't really need your game for our system anymore because we were able to get the one that we actually wanted. Oddly enough, the first one I'd have on the bench is Kirby's Dream Course, if only for virtue of being a golf game, and we don't have any of those already. Granted, it's not really what golf fans want out of a golf game, and it's not what Kirby fans want out of a Kirby game, which is why it's not on the proper roster, but it would still be a unique addition if we need it. Speaking of Kirby, we do have another proper Kirby game with Kirby's Dream Land 3. Next up are the remaining two Donkey Kong Country games. Yes, we should be careful about how many platformers we put on here, but there's actually not that many first-party titles we have to turn to for the Super Nintendo. Sometimes we have to roll with what we got, but at least what we got is still a very good selection of games. And if you've gone through all those but still need one more substitute, I guess you could put Vegas Stakes on there, I guess. And that is what I would choose for the Super Nintendo Classic Edition's lineup of games. Got anything else I missed? Leave a comment below and let me know. Thanks for watching.